So the headline I put out today, the homeless industry is a government scam. That's a bold statement, right? Anytime you impugn other people's motivation, at some point, you got to prove it. I think today I have the goods. I think I can prove to you that all along, the people who've been taking our money to spend on the homeless problem, I'm not all interested in that. I'm Bill Gross. This is my weekly real estate update. For the longest time, I thought the government business of homelessness was just really they're being incompetent as well as enjoying big government to provide business for them and their families and their friends. And I assumed that the mayor and the leaders and the governor were so focused on being reelected, they just never spent time to solve the problem. But really, I had no idea that they really don't care at all about the people they claim to be helping, the homeless. And I have proof of that. The problem of unaffordability contrasts with the problem of homelessness in that when housing gets too expensive, people can't afford to live there, causing more homelessness. And so the government response has always been more government involvement, controlling the zoning, pushing, in the case of LA and California, high density property that nobody wants to live in, making a portion of it available for low-income people, which makes the rest of the units more expensive, makes the developments harder to justify, and overall less building. And so you have this trade-off between they make it less available to buy, there's less houses, that makes what's left more expensive. It was like a cycle. And now you add another component, which is people who you give housing to don't pay. And so this private model of having developers build low-income housing, when the people don't pay, you can't evict them because the government has made it impossible to evict people, or almost impossible in LA. And so now you have this third wheel. The houses are expensive. The government wants to get involved, which makes it ridiculously expensive and stupid. And then on top of that, you can't evict people. Well, I think what I found out this past week, and this is an interesting article on the subject, affordable housing providers are losing money and selling their buildings. But is eliminating eviction protection the answer? Of course not. So what happens is these developers who built these buildings now are stuck with deadbeat as tenants. People can't afford to handle their own property. Well, one of the things that came up lately, I saw this great article in the LA Business Journal on the Veterans Administration ordering I don't know who it is. I have to read the law, but the court ordering the building of 6,000 housing units, 5,000 housing units for veterans in the West Los Angeles Center. Now, if you drive down Wilshire Boulevard and the 405 freeway, you're familiar with the VA hospital, and there's what appears to be housing there, but it's long been abandoned. I was shocked to find out that 5,000 people used to live there. The housing was just abandoned and then eventually turned over to tenants. One of the tenants is UCLA. They built a baseball stadium and a parking lot on the space. And I've talked about that in the past, and I hate UCLA for that and for other reasons. The fact they're anti-Semitic, hate UCLA for that reason too. Can't hate UCLA enough. But the Brentwood School is another tenant on the property where they have offices that they bought through some deal back in the 70s. From this property was donated for homeless veterans. And then they lease other land for their sports fields. We're going to look into this. So originally in 1888, this land was donated to benefit veterans, and it was originally for housing. And it built up to where over time, this beautiful property, 5,000 people actually lived there. And that was through the 1950s. At some point in time, some scam artist figured out how to lease land to UCLA, lease land to Brentwood School, lease land to other parties, I think an oil services company, and theoretically, the Veterans Administration gets paid for that. But what you know is they're not getting fair market value. I'm sure whoever signed the lease, his wife was on the board, or he's on the board, or he's getting vacations. That's going on here. Right, and it's gone forever. To the point now where we don't have this facility. I didn't realize we used to house 5,000 people there. In the article the LA Business Journal put together, which I thought was great, they note that in LA County we have 3,000 homeless veterans. Let me rephrase this, and this is what really got me upset. You mean to tell me that we used to house more than that at that center, that we basically shut down to make a baseball field for UCLA and sports facilities for the Brentwood School? We used to have 5,000 units of housing. We only have 3,000 homeless veterans in all of LA County for all of our homeless problem. And what's fascinating to me is for all the billions we spend on homelessness, we have a tax for homelessness. We have the ULTA tax, what we kind of call the mansion tax in LA, for money for homeless. None of that's working. None of that's building anything. None of that's taking people off the streets. But in the 50s, we had 5,000 units. Today we have 0 to house the 3,000 homeless veterans today. It's a disgrace, UCLA being there. Well, one of the big tenants there is the Brentwood School. So I did a little Google research. The Brentwood School, tuition, low-income schools now, public school, tuition has been $47,000 and $55,000. $47,000 for kindergarten. You send your kid to play with Play-Doh and ride on a tricycle, and they're going to charge you $47,000 a year to use land that homeless veterans should be living in. How important is that school? $47,000 a year. Sounds pretty bougie to me. A little further, you find out that oops, I lost my spot there. That the Brentwood School has a endowment. You know, I lost that number. I want to say it was $13 million endowment, which may not sound like a lot, but it's enough. It's enough that you know they can afford to buy a campus. They can afford to buy. Here it is. The school fund doesn't disclose their endowment figure. You know, I had that number before. I want to say I saw a number elsewhere estimating at $14 million. Whatever it is, they have a lot of money. Versus the homeless vet. You know, when you drive down and get the 405 freeway in Wilshire, there's always veterans there with little signs. They want money, they want food, whatever. This school charges $47,000 for kindergartners and has millions of dollars of endowment money and savings, and they're on that facility. Now, they try to defend themselves. Here, let me pull up real quick. This is their defense. They put a map and say, well, we only really use this part. We only stole this small piece that maybe could fit, I don't know, 30, 40 houses at a couple $1 million a piece. It's only worth $60 or $100 million that we're using that we should be using. Oh, and by the way, we have all these other sports facilities that we lease from the VA, and we let veterans use it. Isn't that nice? No veterans will live there, but they let veterans use their facility. Isn't that nice? So if you're a multi-millionaire veteran who lives near them, you can use their facilities. But if you're a homeless vet, you got to take the bus, get off at Wilshire Boulevard, go up against Sepulveda, walk across some neighborhood to use the basketball court that the Brentwood School is so nice to let you use. Despicable people. Despicable. Now, again, my ire, UCLA, well documented. My ire with Brentwood School, despicable that they'd allow that to go on. You know, these liberal Democrats want to have these land use things where like the King of England went to Canada and talked about the land was originally by these Aboriginal Indians in Canada, whatever. Here you have a case where the school's literally stolen the land. That's where they got it from. And they're running their multi-million-dollar school in the place. But really, they're not the worst, because who's the worst here? The worst are, where is our mayor? Where is the governor? They talk about wanting to solve the homeless problem. They raised our taxes to solve the homeless problem. And here you have homeless vets who were promised this land, who were given this land. In 2015, there was a federal court order ordering the land to be given back to the VA to use for housing, and UCLA and the Brentwood School hired attorneys and have spent 10 years fighting that order. Now, recently, they seem to have lost finally a major motion, or are maybe going to give up. I don't think they're going to ever, in my book. But for 10 years, they've been fighting and spending millions of dollars that could have helped homeless veterans. They don't care, UCLA and the Brentwood School and these other parties. But where is the mayor? And you might say, well, this isn't their fight to pick. You know, housing 3,000 people, the Trump administration, it's only been in office 120 days or so, they announced they're going to retake money that was used for illegal aliens and use it for building this housing. They committed to 6,000 units. Now you might say, well, that's great. Can you get behind that? The land is already designated. We already know where it is. Meaning a lot of these homeless projects, the problem is, well, where are you going to put them? Where are you going to build these houses? Where are these people going to live? This land was donated in the 1880s for veterans. We have the land. You have to buy the land. One of the biggest problems on any homeless problem is the expenses of buying the land. This land's already been dedicated. You might say, well, and many people say the problem is financing. In fact, they have this article by this, you know, I'm so sick of college professors acting like they're smart. Can I just say I'm sick of it? So the LA Business Journal quotes this guy. I'm sure he's a big shot of some sort at USC, my alma mater. Shows you how far we dropped. The head of the Richard Green, I'm sure it's Dr. Green, the director and chair of the USC Lusk Center for Real Estate. Now I knew the Lusk family homes. They were home builders. They weren't bureaucrats like Richard Green, who's a lifelong academic, which means I never did anything with my life, and worked for Fannie Mae, meaning he's a politician. Never built a house, never sold a house, but he's at the Lusk Center training the next generation of bureaucrats and government do-nothings. And so he says in here, very hard to build in California. In fact, first off, the construction workers are going to have to drive a long way because if you hire local people, you have to pay them a high wage. Isn't that good news? Isn't jobs for high wages for construction here in LA, isn't that a good thing? Isn't that what we want? No. Richard Green, as he sits around, I'm sure, with his Marchand pipe in his meetings with his tenured professors, no, raising wages for workers is bad because it might make him have to pay more when he goes on his fancy vacations. No. Let me tell you, Dr. Green, it's a good thing to have to pay high wages to American workers to build houses for homeless veterans. What else would you want to pay wages for? He also says the problem would be financing. Well, there's no financing here. The federal government has the money allocated for it. So we have the property, the allocation, the financing is already taken care of. But he shows us two colors. Like every Democratic hack, like every political hack, like every academic know-nothing Einstein, he says, with Trump's immigration policy, it's getting harder to find construction labor because immigrants are just disappearing from job sites. So what he's saying is, because we brought all these people from Guatemala and other countries illegally, we don't have anybody to do these jobs. Well, Mr. Green, I don't know if you ever hire anybody, but you go into Upwork, you post your job, you hire people, you interview a bunch of them, you check them out, you hire them. You go to a union, they hire them. Yes, you have to pay a higher wage. That's what we want. We want higher wages to build a real job. See, the problem with Mr. Green, Professor Green, he's all fine for paying ridiculous wages to his fellow professors at USC. He's not up for paying for jobs to build houses for veterans in Los Angeles. That's where the people should get paid, not sitting around a desk telling us why we can't build houses. Let's build some houses. We have the land. Am I crazy here? You watching this? Will somebody say, yes, Bill, you're crazy. Please get some help. Or no, Bill, you're not crazy. You literally have a professor saying, we don't want to pay Americans to build houses. We have to pay them too much. As opposed to, no. We want to pay. We want to build houses. We want to house our vets. Yes, we also want to create good jobs, good paying jobs, construction jobs. Let's build a construction industry. I grew up in a time where we had Americans who did construction jobs. Now, what would happen would be you'd start there at 16, 17, 18 years old and learn how to pound the nails and to put the boards up. And then you learn how to be a supervisor or a lead and then a supervisor and then a manager and then have your own company. So there's upward mobility. These are great businesses. You know what's interesting as a real estate agent? Those businesses are really almost non-existent today. I was literally talking to a customer on Friday about a contractor, how bad the contractor is. And the problem is the contractors are all either immigrants who came here illegally and don't hold our values for customer service, or they're older and no longer able to do the work. We're missing the American employees who grew into these jobs as contractors. And as a result, we don't have good contractors in California, enough of them. And that's what constrains these jobs. Well, how would you get more? You pay them more. Why would you pay them more? They're building houses for people. The land's paid for. The money's already been allocated by the Veterans Administration. So let's spend it on building houses and let's pay good contractors. Am I going on and on here? I don't know. I am just so over the top, tired and pissed of these excuses not to build houses and take care of American citizens. Anyhow, that's my story on the Veterans Administration. I'd love to get your feedback. Let's take a look at the real estate market overall. Interest rates, for all the talk about volatility in the business, if you look at that graph, the rates are about what they've been nonstop since January. There's really been no real change. They're a little below 7. They've been above 7, below 7, above 7, below 7. They're good enough for plenty of buyer demand. The problem we have in California, and LA in particular, is we're not building enough houses. Oh, refer to the prior story. Let's build 6,000 houses for vets. But we don't have a construction industry. Oh, refer to the prior story. why we should have more construction workers. In terms of inventory for houses, house for sale, we still, there's stories nationally about housing prices going down. Redfin with some fake stories. I think I'll talk about a little later. But the reality is, if you look at the inventory now compared to historically where it's been, it's still below record low numbers. We've had our population increase in the last 5 years, and we have less houses for sale than we had 5 years ago. So like any other business, if you don't grow, eventually prices go up. And the only way to get prices down is to build more houses, see the prior story. Now in LA specifically, our market's been at 36, 37, 38, 37, using Altos research. And so it's holding as a seller's market. Slight seller's market, but slight seller's market. So that's what we're in the marketplace. It seems to me we got plenty of room to build more houses and to get our housing industry up and worked up. Okay, in the news, this one's a little frustrating also. The fires, there's a report that came out by an organization called Fire Rebuild. Now, every study has its bias, and this one's no different than any other. But man, oh man, does this take the task for government. And, the conclusion was, let me read it. Unprecedented failure, not unprecedented conditions. Palisades fire proven to result not from climate change, but from negligence and incompetence. And I want to read a little bit. I have it on the email version of this. The report concludes that the January 7th, 2025 Palisades fire occurred under historically typical, predictable, and manageable weather conditions, contrary to false public claims of unprecedented or unmanageable factors. Analysis of data from 48 weather stations shows wind speeds were well below hurricane thresholds, did not trigger high wind warnings, drought conditions aligned with normal Southern California climate cycles, multiple agencies issued accurate early fire forecasts. These facts directly refute misleading narratives that extreme conditions caused the fire spread. The only unprecedented aspect was the failure to contain the fire despite ample warnings and manageable conditions. And one of the reasons why it gets into is we don't have enough resources. We as a city and a county and a state, we're bankrupt. We've spent so much money on healthcare and so much money on alien healthcare, billions of dollars, and homelessness with no progress on either of those fronts. We've had to cut, meanwhile, wildlife management and forestry services, and as a result, weren't prepared for what became a disaster. And one of the people who is really at the forefront of this effort to get things on track is Rick Caruso. I'm a big fan of his. But I will say, at the end of the day, I think the city of Los Angeles is settling for disgracefully poor politics. As long as that's the case, our politicians aren't going to let us rebuild. I don't see a way out. I see absent some dynamic, charismatic leader leading a revolution against our current politicians. The current politicians have such a control on it. I just don't see I don't mean to be pessimistic. I mean, my life would be good either way, and your life could be good either way. But in terms of what's really going to happen, I don't see us rebuilding 10,000 homes in the Palisades. It's just going to be forever and a lot of money wasted. Okay, under fake news, now I'm going to actually defend the state of California a little bit here. I think there is a cheap shot taken by Realtor.com. Realtor.com wrote, Captain America star Chris Evans puts LA home on the market for $7 million as he quits California to move back to the East Coast. Now, quits California to me is just kind of a cheap shot, because if you read the article, I've never seen Captain America. Nothing against it, just not my juice. But Chris Evans is from Philadelphia, and he's from the East Coast. And he says quite clearly, I came out here to film, and they were filming the Captain Americas here, and I think he did 10 of them or something. I didn't really know there were that many done, but whatever, good for him. And he's done with that in his life. He's ready to move on, maybe outgrew the part, maybe he doesn't want to do it anymore, they don't pay enough, I don't know. He doesn't want to do more Captain America, therefore the business that kept him here is no longer here. He's going to move to the East Coast to be with his family. It does not say anything about him not liking being in California. So again, I'm one to tell you our California economy is terrible. It's a terrible business climate, but let's not pile on and make people as though they said something they didn't say. Okay, speaking of things that didn't say under fake news, Redfin, always up for fake news. The U.S. housing market has nearly 500,000 more sellers than buyers, the most on record. That will likely cause home prices to fall. So now Redfin's on record saying home prices are going to fall. So I'm going to be on record saying not yet. Now, something could change. We could go to war with China, or China could invade Taiwan or something. But as we sit here right now, prices may drag out and stay where they are for a long time, but they're not going to go down. That's not going to happen. That's my prediction. Now, Redfin, they want you to click, and they want you to think they're authority. So they can be wrong this week and see the opposite be wrong next week. They don't care. You just got to click on them either way. How do they come up with this? See, to me, there's exact number of buyers and sellers because a buyer buys a property and closes escrow, and a seller sells a property and closes escrow. Somebody who lists a property too high and never sells it is not a seller. They would like to be a seller. Somebody who's a buyer who offers low and never buys anything is not a buyer. They're a prospective buyer. They're a possible buyer. They're a lead. Maybe. And maybe not even. And so when Redfin says there's 500,000 more, what do they base that on? Well, if you read their statistics, they document sellers by people with homes on the market as evidenced by listing it. Okay, that's a fair standard. I mean, not all sellers who list property always want to sell. A lot of them get kind of talked into by the agent, but let's say for sake of discussion, close enough. But they have this formula for buyers to determine who a buyer is based on how many applied for loans and how many are looking for houses, how many are showing. Yeah, well, there might be more people that Redfin and other companies talk into looking at houses. But if you're not willing to buy the house for what it's selling for, you're not a buyer. What I try to tell people all the time is, if you like to buy a house, a $20 house for $18, you're not a buyer. You're a bargain hunter in a market where there's no bargain hunters. This is a competitive marketplace. If you're a buyer and you're willing to pay $20 plus closing costs, you're a buyer. That's the reality of a market today. And so what Redfin does, I believe, is trying to create this illusion that buyers are frustrated and it's not their fault, and they should have bought something, but for the bad sellers. No, it's not that at all. It's that if you didn't buy the property, it's because you didn't want to pay the price to get the property, whether it be plan ahead, get your paperwork put together in time, and or make an offer, or get a good agent like me to represent you. So again, I think Redfin is just unfortunately misleading their customers as always, as Redfin always does. Okay, good news. This is really good news, I think. Palantir, I don't even know if you know what Palantir is. Palantir is a company that uses AI for military contracting. Phenomenal company, a phenomenal founder, and what they've done, I can't remember his name. I'm sure it's in the article, Alex something. Anyhow, genius. And I have to say, I've done a deep dive on all of his talks I can, how they use technology to make our military systems more efficient by anticipating bad guys, verifying bad guys, documenting activities and such. Fantastic. So Palantir now has a contract with Fannie Mae to detect fraud in seconds that might otherwise take minutes or months or days or hours or weeks or months. And I think it makes sense to anybody who deals with the government because they're so inefficient. We learned through Doge that our Social Security files were handled with folders in paper in some cave in Colorado somewhere. And it's only recently everything been scanned and digitized so that when you're ready to receive retirement pay, your Social Security benefits that you paid into the system, they're processed with technology that's available in 2025. And so similarly, having been in the military contracting business right out of college, I can tell you these very antiquated systems, techniques, and technologies, and getting a state-of-the-art company like Palantir to work with Fannie Mae rather than just the military is a phenomenal test. I hope they do well. I hope they find all the fraud they can. We know everything we've heard about the government tells us they're rife for fraud. The example of people on Social Security over 120 years, unbelievable. And so hopefully Palantir will also help Fannie Mae cut down fraud and make loans more available for people who need it and less available for people who don't. So that's good news. What do you think? Okay, did I go off too much on the VA story? I'm convinced. If Gavin Newsom, the most dangerous place in the world to be is between Gavin Newsom and a camera or Karen Bass and a camera. If they really wanted to end the homelessness, they'd be pushing the building of those units in the city of Los Angeles. It's been 10 years by law. It's been 50 years of a ripoff of our veterans. And we have federal money and the land and no financing needed to get it done right now. What do you think? I'm outraged. Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me I'm right. Give me some feedback. Subscribe, like. If I can help in any way, reach out at Bill Gross Probate on social media. As always, make today your best day ever.